All right, folks, welcome back. Let me go ahead and get through some of the questions that we had and some of the things that I want to cover here. Uh, Before I move on, let me talk about my late policy. So, if you're now joining the class, I'll do attendance here shortly. Um, but, you do attendance here. Uh, Let me talk about late policy for this particular class. Now, last week I mentioned most people, if they fail this course, they fail it mostly because they don't submit their assignments. Or they submit them incredibly late for the entire semester. Um, this is kind of how the grading policy for this particular class works. Oh, come on. Essentially, it is important to participate in the sense of doing, if not the assignments, but also attending class when at all possible. If there's any question about whether or not you can join or participate in the class, by all means, please let me know and we can figure that out. But if you just kind of vanish on me, generally speaking, uh, failing to participate in the class does affect your final grade. Um, the way that my working period works for any assignment is typically, this last assignment was a little bit weird because I needed to see the assignment sooner than later because it gives me an idea of what everybody's doing. I see that quite a few people did not submit anything. Um, I would ask why, but I need, for those of you who haven't gotten a chance to do the introductory assignment, to do it today. Either after class or at some point today, mostly because it helps me guide the course in the way that is going to be the most useful for everyone as much as I can. For those of you who are submitting late, typically, if you submit late, I just knock a grade off, about 25 to 30% depending on the amount of points. Typically everything is going to be 100 points, so I typically knock off a grade before I even start grading it. And then at that point, the grade that you get is going to be based on that truncation. So it's basically impossible to get an A on an assignment if you miss the 1 week due date. I will accept an assignment up to a week after its due date and still grade it. However, if an assignment is more than a week late, which means that you've had a week to work on it and then it's a week late, I just will not grade it. That's just kind of how it works. So I've had a lot of students, if not forget to submit an assignment, then whatnot. This is what I generally believe. I generally believe that students make mistakes. I genuinely believe that students just forget to hit submit and those assignments are done. Never in my teaching career have I ever had a student straight up bold-faced lie and say, oh, it's done, I'll have that in, just so they can buy like the one day that they need to do the assignment, because they're not going to get it done. That's not what happens. So if you forget to submit the assignment and I give it a 0, I'll poke you about it. I'll be like, hey, where is it? And you'll say, oh my gosh, it's done, I just need to submit it. Submit it, I'll grade it as normal because I believe you. But if it's not done, just don't lie to me. That's the only thing I ask. That you just tell me it's not done, take your L, and we'll move on to the next assignment. You could probably do that with up to maybe 2 or 3 assignments and still pass the class, but it's not going to be pretty, and it's not going to be, and it's going to be close. Especially because I think a 68 or less is failing in this particular at this institution. So keep that in mind. All right, let me go ahead and do attendance here real quick, and then we'll get through it here. Alex? No, Alex? Today is my ad drop period, folks, so if you're generally not here, I'm probably going to drop folks here. Alexander, yeah. Come on. Marcel? Good. This is how I'm going to learn your folks' names as well. At least the best that I can. Names to faces. Ryan.
Here.
There you are. Ezekiel?
I'm over here.
Ah, there you are. Liz is here. I know Liz from the production studio class. Actually, Liz, you're not here.
Oh, okay. I'll leave the room.
Liz left the chat.
Leslie? Come on. Jackson? Here you are. I'm really bad at names, folks, so if I forget, I am not doing it to be a jerk. I'm just really bad at them. It takes me about 9 weeks to learn everybody's name. Sophia? Oh, you were going to get 500 points for that. Let's not do that. I almost gave you 500 instead of 50. Charles. Is it Charles or Charlie?
I don't care.
Not Chuck?
Not Chuck.
Okay, definitely not Chuck. C-Note? No, not C-Note. Audrey. Vigo. There you are. Basically, you could drop anyone who has been missing for the last two. Luke.
Yep.
Joshua or Josh? Josh. Daniel. And who's that? Marshall. Yep, that's everyone. All right. All right. Good. Good. Looks like I'm only gonna potentially have to drop one person. I'll have to reach out and see if they respond. All right, folks. So the first question that we get at the beginning of this class that I want to kind of cover before we get to the actual object types and the way that the engine kind of works in general is file management. Now, one of the things about files in the Unreal Editor is that typically you're not going to be bringing any one particular file into your engine. For all intents and purposes, if your intention is from moving to laptop to desktop and back and forth, this is generally what I recommend. If you're going to be doing any kind of work like that, what I typically do is I utilize Unreal's zip project function right there under File, Zip Project. You can do it manually using the Windows zipping or etc., just like I showed you from last week. But if you want to keep it as simple as possible, the zip file system in the Unreal Editor does not miss anything, and it does work relatively well. This allows you to zip a project. I'll show you here real quick. We'll put this in my. I'll just put this somewhere that I can like destroy it later. I'll put it over here. As you can see, when you start zipping up your project, it gives you a short message to tell you that it is, in fact, cooking your project into a zip file. It might take a minute, it might take up to 5, depends. This algorithm for their zipping is actually relatively slow, but it does not miss anything. It does essentially zip the entire project together. So once it's finished packaging, you're going to get a happy message like that, and then you can show it in Explorer, and there's your actual project right there. Now, depending on which zip or unzipping program you have, it's going to have a different icon, so don't be worried if your icon is going to be a little bit different. I use 7-zip myself, like I mentioned last week, but there you go. That's your entire file. If I go ahead and open this up, you can see that the entire project is a config, a content, and the icon that essentially tells Windows that this is an Unreal project. Remember, your project is not that blue icon. I will at least have one of you submit that as an assignment. Typically in this class, you do not submit your projects for review. You submit screenshots and or videos, mostly because poor Moodle cannot handle the default Unreal size. That's just the way that it is, right? Most of your projects will be relatively small, but will balloon up as assets or elements become more complex. Question?
So can you use Shadowplay to record your project?
Shadowplay, OBS, whatever you like. We can talk about that when we're doing our assignment one here later today. As you can see, the project itself is technically missing a few files. Let me go ahead and explain that so that people do not freak out. As you can see, the actual file itself contains a config, a content, a derived data cache, an intermediate file, a saved file, and then that. So as you can see, the difference between what gets zipped and what your actual file is going to look different. Do not panic. The reason why is Unreal needs those particular files in order for it to be fast. When you zip up a file and you leave behind things like the derived data cache, the intermediate folder, etc., every time you open the engine, it's going to rebuild those files. Now, it's not going to compile fully like we did on day one. Everybody saw that compilation time, etc. But what that means is when you package a file or package a project to move to another computer, it's going to need to remake those folders. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. The engine will do it by itself, but it might increase your first startup time by about anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes. It's not that big of a deal. These two projects are fundamentally the same. So if you zip up your project using Unreal zip method and you notice that there's a discrepancy between what you have on your computer and what got zipped up, I always have questions about this. Don't worry. The engine will just remake the folders that it needs. The only things that it zips are mission critical and stuff that the engine needs. In fact, a lot of those files in the zipped version over on the right essentially write a special INI that tell the engine, hey, you're going to need to recreate the intermediate folder, but this is how. And so the engine will just know what to do, right? It's only giving you the mission critical stuff with some hang tags inside of the files to tell the engine, hey, just rebuild those files, it's not going to be a big deal. Those files are typically done for speed purposes and no other reason. So don't panic if the files don't line up. This only happens if you use the zip file system or the zip project file system, or the zip project function in Unreal. They're going to look different. Don't panic. It is the same. And then at this point, what you can do, and what I typically recommend, is you set up source control for yourself. Mr. Figueroa, what's source control? Just a fancy name for if you have some kind of online storage. I usually drag and drop to Google Drive. Under no circumstances, for whatever reason, if you're moving from here to another machine, moving one machine to over, moving stuff to another classroom, I don't care. Do not drag your bare unzipped projects into any Google Drive or Box or OneDrive or anything, because it will want to zip it up in its own way, and Google sometimes views certain Unreal INI files as not being zippable. So it just won't zip them. And then when you open your project, Unreal is going to say, hey, why are these files missing? And Google's going to be like, it's not my problem. It also tends to break up the zipping project. You'll be able to upload it to Google Drive, but once you start downloading it, you're going to get like 3 or 4 different files that all need to be unzipped separately. Just make your life easier. Do not use Google Drive or OneDrive or anything without first zipping up the project. It can only end in tears if you do it the other way. So at this point, since I have my project here, that's just what I put on my drive, that's just what I put on Google Drive, that's what I put on my physical hard drive, my portable drive. I think I've had a student once have like a Galaxy Watch that they had space in that they could put projects on. I don't recommend, that's so cursed. I don't recommend that. But you can move a file, you can move that zip file like you can move any file. If you use Google Drive, which I typically use, that will not be broken up, it will not be zipped weirdly, it will not be pulled apart. It will just move from place to place. Take it, put it on the desktop of your machine or your working file structure of your machine, and then go from there. A word of caution: do not name your projects obscenely long names. Up to, I think, 32 characters, I think, is what you're allowed to do. The reason why is because Windows gets really weird about file names. Once a file name or file structure, C, docs, file, file name, asset name, gets obscenely long, Windows likes to not do anything with that. Windows likes to get weird. In fact, Windows will warn you if a file structure or file name is getting too long, simply because there's just not enough memory address for Windows to manage obscenely long file names. Now, Epic will protect you against this and warn you, but it is not a perfect science, because sometimes people will zip zips of zips and unzip zips of zips inside of other zips and then zip those zips. It's something that students do typically because y'all are younger, but I've noticed over the past few years that general computational knowledge has gone down, and most people don't know how to properly manage their files and or zip files, so it's not unusual to have someone with an Unreal project with file in front of it. That will make Windows really unhappy and break your Unreal project. The last thing that I want to talk about before we move on to the actual Unreal stuff, especially when dealing with file management and whatnot, in all my years of doing development, in all my time of working with Unreal, it is possible to corrupt the INI to launch your project. But it is almost, if not, I've never seen it happen, impossible to corrupt your content folder. Your content folder is the most important folder because it contains the content of the project. If you can't open your project, don't panic. Send me an email. We can just put your content folder in another project. It's that simple. I don't recommend it. The engine doesn't like it. It gets a little bit weird about doing that, but it is basically the way that it is structured. The way that this is designed is not for speed, but for safety. So if something gets corrupted, it's not lost because it is saved as a separate file. If a Photoshop file becomes, well, let me ask you a better question. If a Maya file becomes corrupted, that's why you should use MA, by the way. Does anyone have a preference, MA, MB? Does anyone know the difference between Maya ASCII and Maya binary?
I just know that there's no accents in Hindi.
Maya binary is faster because that's what Maya likes, but it is lossy. If you close if your computer power is down while that project is open, it will corrupt it. Maya ASCII saves everything in an ASCII file and can be recovered, in theory, if you're good at command line, which there's a lot of automated tools online that can recover it. If you're not using where are my Maya users? If you're not using Maya ASCII, at least for your projects, you should start. Strongly recommend it. Strongly recommend it. But unlike Maya, assets are stored in a UAsset repository and are very difficult, if not impossible, to corrupt. It is possible to corrupt the launcher. Big deal. We can just throw a new launcher on there. Assets themselves, basically impossible to corrupt. Don't prove me wrong, but please, but don't panic. If you can't open your project file, restart your machine, so on and so forth, and then go from there. Question?
Will you be covering character movement?
Yes. Probably in this section when we actually get character movement in there. Oh, do you want, as in, what? Can you be more specific about what part of character?
Custom animations for the character?
Much later, mostly because animations are kind of like its own thing. Especially because I don't teach any of the animation classes here. That's more of a question for your animation professors, but yeah, we'll cover some of it at the very least. Not until I think week 6 or week 7 when we're dealing with like custom character animations. I try to cover as much as possible in the first class to give people room for the second class. Anyways, that kind of covers everything, at least at the head, when it comes to file management or asset management. We'll cover merging here in a little bit. All right, let me go ahead and get to it here, folks. All right. Go ahead and close that. Don't need this, don't need this. All right, this is kind of where we left off last week. All right. So let me double check to make sure I'm covering everything that I need. Let's see. Probably the most important thing about Unreal is not necessarily its navigation. Let me actually go ahead and open up the things so that people can see my. What was your last name? I think I. Oh, that's right. Let me go ahead and.
Alright, I tried to email you this morning.
Did you? I didn't get it.
Yeah, it was like 7:30, 7:40.
That might have been why my phone vibrated. I was already in here.
Sorry, running out of late.
It's okay. Oh, that's weird. I haven't gotten an email from you.
Oh.
Just a roster thing. Hold on, let me double check. There you are, 7:37. Yeah. Commuter traffic. Okay. Okay, you're in class here. So that's everyone. Okay, I'll go ahead and send that later. Okay, where was I? All right. Probably more important than anything else. Why is it not tracking my buttons? Hold on. Is getting assets into the Unreal Editor. Now, it is important to kind of know its general navigation, and we'll talk about the view modes here and whatnot later, kind of how this is going to help us figure out stuff, but I'll do that when I actually have something that I can demonstrate rather than just a box. Well, let's go ahead and talk about managing assets, which is basically mesh types, inputs, and collisions for the Unreal Editor. Mostly because it's going to give us everything that we need to kind of figure out what our physical elements of the world is. This opens up the week for, and if you're going back to game design here, sorry, I gotta look at the actual week here to make sure. We took object intro and world building / level design stuff. We need to talk about that just in general. All right, so by and large, the first source of assets for most of you is going to be the. Are you going to be able to see from there?
Yeah, there's nothing there yet.
Okay. I generally ask people to be able to see. If you can see from there, totally, I'm okay with that. All right. So, generally, the source of elements that we're going to be using in this class is typically going to be Megascans or the Unreal Asset Store. Let's go ahead and get set up. Well, you're going to do this later, but I'm going to go ahead and get set up your Megascans logins here so that you have access to your repository of high resolution game quality assets, and I'll talk about them, their problems, what works, what doesn't, so on and so forth. So, by and large, when you are adding anything to the Unreal, let's get rid of our friend the cube, we don't want them anymore. You're going to want to add stuff to the editor using that quick draw right there. Any menu in the Unreal Editor that lets you add a thing also lets you start typing. For example, if I click on that and I type in, do you see at the very top it says start typing to search? If I type in the word cube, it's going to give me all of the elements of the cube in general. For those of you who are still new to the Unreal Editor and you feel more comfortable using the Place Actors panel, by all means, go ahead and have the Place Actors panel open. That's basically just a repository of all the stuff that you can grab. It's not very well sorted. This is everything that the editor can add, at least by default. And it gives you an idea of what the stuff that you've recently placed anyways. This menu and the drop-down menu here are the same, except this is a much tighter implementation. We'll worry about the Place Actors stuff down here later, but what we need to talk about right now is we want to talk about importing content, Kixel Bridge, and Unreal Marketplace. Let's go ahead and skip import content for now. I'll import some elements later. And I'm going to talk about the Kixel Bridge. Now you can pronounce it Kixel or Quixel or whatever you want. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Now, this is basically a website that's loading into the Unreal Editor. Don't worry, we can take this and we can dock this up here just like anything else. I typically like to dock things at the very top so that I can migrate between one and the other. This is Kixel Bridge. by and large, a collection of something like 14 or 15,000 assets, almost 15,000 assets that are game quality and ready to work out of the box. Anything that you produce with Kixel assets, as long as you are signed in and working through Unreal, is free to use. You can release a game with it. You can do an asset flip if you want. Asset flips in Unreal are actually a lot rarer, mostly because it's harder to produce anything in Unreal than like Unity, I guess you could say. But that gives you an idea. This marketplace does not contain everything, but it contains a lot. Like, for example, we have pies and a variety of other things that you can download. Now, we'll talk about this in a sec. I'm going to click on this, and you'll see at the very, very top right, we'll be able to sign in. I'm going to go ahead and sign in right now.
How did you bring up Bridget?
One more time.
How did you bring up Bridget?
Oh, just like everything else, if I go into place actors, we can go to Kixel Bridge, or we can go into the content drawer and add Kixel content. You're looking at that like I'm crazy. It should be in there.
Still astounded you can sign into Unreal with a Lego account.
Go ahead.
I know, right?
I'm installing the most recent version of Unreal right now, but I've used it somewhat before,
Mhm.
just version 5. And under it says install plugins and Quixel is there. Do I need to upload the plugin to the new one?
No, the plugin should auto download.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure.
Give me. I'm going to go ahead and sign in. Let's move you out of the way so nobody can see my password. And I know I have 2FA on this. I strongly recommend 2FA for the record, mostly because if you lose your account, boy, it's not fun. I know, let me go ahead and, before I move on, like, as people quickly write down my blog in here.
Well, isn't it a simple use usually?
Technically, but you'd be surprised. I try to at least practice decent InfoSec, especially sometimes because I do lectures not just to this, but like for a talk, and it's been a while since I've done a talk. I think the last time I did a talk was like 2016. But when you're in front of a lot of people, you don't want them to see your passwords and whatnot. So you'd be surprised what people are trying to do at any time.
What would the purpose of stealing someone's Unreal account be, I guess?
You'd have access to my UIWS, for example, which cost me about $400. You'd have access to all of my paid-for assets. You could steal my V-Bucks. I don't know. Questions?
If someone is selling an asset flip game and doesn't have any malicious intent, would it still not be a scam?
That's like 4 questions in one. I am dispassionate about what an asset flip is. If people buy an asset flip, then let people buy an asset flip. I don't necessarily worry about that. If you want morality, I mean, they have mass on Sundays. I don't work on asset flips myself. I try to, well, not if I try. I create original works, work on my own stuff just in general. But like, I'm not the morality police when it comes to making assets in general or making anything. So it's up to you to decide that. Does that answer your question? I saw another hand. Okay, let's continue on. This is primarily the first, if not maybe the first or 2 places that you look for your assets. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the stuff that's available here, just kind of very quickly. And we'll talk about kind of how to download each of these. Now, I strongly recommend using the Megascan store through Unreal and not logging into Megascans via the internet. The reason why, not the internet, but like the website. The reason why is because if you access Megascans through the Unreal Engine, it automatically will create assets for the Unreal Engine. There will be no question on whether or not they work. If you are logged into the web interface, or funnily enough, you can download an applet or an app to your device or to your home PC that lets you go to the Megascans store. Megascans is not owned by Epic completely. Other engines and other people, it's just an asset store, right? However, if you access that asset store through the web interface, it's going to be different than the one that you access through Unreal, and the assets will be slightly different. Same with the downloading properties, same with downloading anything in general. I strongly recommend, this is where students were like, oh, I navigated to the website and then I logged in and then the assets were different. Do not try to access this outside of the Unreal Engine. It will just make your life a little bit harder. We have things like assets, plants, surfaces, so on and so forth. We'll talk about these when they become relevant, related to the making materials, lighting, so on and so forth. We also have access to metahumans, for example. I'm sure a lot of people have seen a lot of explanations on the metahumans. I don't really work too often with metahumans. Funnily enough, Max periodically does work with metahuman. This is just kind of an editor to kind of get and create characters or custom characters, so on and so forth. I'm going to go ahead and go to 3D assets here. So as you can see, there's quite a few different props and elements that we can use that are generally free. Not even generally free, that are free. There are also collections of things that we can use. Like, for example, if we go to Medieval Banquet here, oh yeah, look at those chickens. Oh, those are quails, excuse me. That is the most cursed smoked sausage I've ever seen in my life. As you can see, we have access to things like food. It just depends on whatever you want to build. There's a lot of preset packs that are useful to whatever that you want to do, to whatever it is that you want to do. Now, do all the packs work with each other? No, but it gives you a lot of assets that you can work with in general. So keep that in mind. I'm going to go to 3D assets. And I'm going to go ahead, let me grab something useful. Let's see what the latest assets are, anything fun that I can use. I'm just going to grab something like this, Desert Ledge. I'm just going to click on one thing. So as you can see, now that I've clicked it, over here in the details side, it'll give me an idea of what it's supposed to be. These are all the tags of what it's supposed to look like, and if you want similar assets to the thing that you are looking for, you can go ahead and look under those tags or limit the search to those tags to give you assets that are relatively similar. Granted, a lot of the assets from neighboring packs do not interface with each other very well. You're going to have to get creative in how you interface certain elements with each other, either by modifying the textures, so on and so forth. But we'll talk about that when we get there. That's going to be in a couple weeks. The most important elements of this is going to be this section right here, which gives you the idea of what the size is supposed to be. This gives you the size relative to the Unreal character, which I believe is 6'2". I think Manny and Quinn are enormous. So it gives you an idea of how large this asset is by default next to a standing character. It tells you how this asset is constructed. An open asset means that it is not fully manifold. What is manifold? When you hear manifold, you can use the word watertight. Does anyone know what a watertight asset is? Go ahead.
It's like completely sealed. All the edges are touching.
Exactly. Mr. Figueroa, why would there be an open asset? You can't see the bottom of a rock anyways. At least if it's on the ground. At least ideally, right? This means that this has a very specific orientation and a face of it is in fact open. So that might not be ideal for your design, but it tells you immediately what it does, what it is, how it works, and it says that it's part of an asset called assembly. That basically means that this asset by itself is designed for populating levels. Okay, cool. It also gives you a friendly list of things that are related to it, but we won't worry about that. Let's talk about this area down here. Now I have this magnified so that people can see it. It gives you an idea of low quality, medium quality, high quality, and nanite quality. I'll talk about nanite in this session, but let's go ahead and talk about what these are. 1K, 2K, and 4K essentially in terms of quality. So basically, low quality is probably good enough for most of your guys' purposes, whereas the high quality is going to be the highest possible resolution. You know what, just to keep things honest and simple so we can see what these assets actually do and how to manage assets in Unreal, I'm going to grab the low quality, the high quality, and I'll talk about nanite. Down here gives you, oh, let me go ahead and turn off the magnifier. This section down here, funnily enough, this is broken. This allows you to make materials that blend with each other. I don't know why it's still in there. It's broken as of Unreal 5.3 and hasn't been repaired. Unless you're me, I can repair it, but I don't recommend using it. So stay away from the blending settings down here. It's not going to be anything that you can do with it. We have our download key and we have our add key. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab the low quality and I'm just going to go ahead and hit download. Now what's going to happen is the asset will download and it will be put into your local space right here. So if we go and check out our local space, you see that our asset has been downloaded locally. Similar to the Vault Cache, this asset now exists on our machine. So what that means is even though this asset is not being used, it is taking up space. Keep that in mind. I typically go back and delete this file location at any point in time. The file location is going to be right here in your preferences. You can see Documents Megascans library. Depends on what you're trying to do with it. But if we go ahead and click on our asset, sorry, I clicked off, click back on, it gives you an idea of what you can download. Now, it says that it's been downloaded, but only the low quality has been downloaded. Let's go ahead and add this to our project. Now, Megascans does have drag and drop capability. It is jank. I usually only ever add things by using the add button down here. I'm going to go ahead and do that right away. Click on add. We're going to get another content window that says, hey, look at this asset. I'm going to go back to the level that we were working on, and then I'm going to wiggle the screen, and I'm going to, oh, sorry.
Did you put subscribe on the asset?
Give me a sec. It's being weird. Subscribe on the asset?
Yeah, like I don't have apps anymore.
The app button.
Okay.
One more time?
I don't have an app button.
It's the web form.
Oh, you're not signed in. Top right. Go ahead.
I was gonna ask, so with your normal workflow, do you have like a huge folder of just rocks, or like you said?
Oh, I absolutely have a huge folder of rocks. I have no less than like 30 some. I can do a lot with one rock. In fact, I'll demonstrate
But those
later.
open face ones, that's what you're saying is a little harder to,
I just put them on the outside.
yeah,
Look, most of the time you're just hiding
to
everything,
add variety.
right? It's just variety is, well, if you have a rock and then you turn it over slightly, you now have two different rocks.
Mhm.
You'd be surprised
You
what you
put
can get
three
away
rocks
with.
together, yeah.
Yeah, now you have a boulder.
a whole new rock.
A lot of game development is in fact that. Question?
I know Megascans has packs in like the Epic Game like marketplace. Is there any advantage in using those over the like directly getting them from Quixel?
I'll talk about that. A lot of those packs were done before Epic
Yeah.
integrated it. It's kind of an organizational mess, but I'll talk about that. Especially, you notice what's missing from Megascans? Trees.
Ooh.
Do you know where they're on? Where they're at?
They're in the market.
They're in the marketplace, named Megascans trees.
Mm-hmm.
They just never reintegrated them, and they don't plan to apparently.
Is that odd?
I think that's odd too, but they made an announcement about it years ago, and they're like, we're just that's just kind of how it is.
Some sort of conspiracy monopoly.
It says on the side menu, it just says subscribe.
Go ahead and click subscribe. That usually means that there's a discrepancy between your Epic Games account and the account that you have on your computer. That is not. It doesn't. You probably signed in with an Xbox account, or you didn't make a pure Unreal account. You might have to log in. It's kind of painful at that point, but go ahead and sign in completely and see if it lets you. You shouldn't have to pay for it because if you use your Epic Games account, whatever your password, the email and password that you use to log in, you have access to it for free. That's how that works, folks. It's when you start getting squirrely and start using different accounts to try to log into Unreal Assets, is it going to ask for money? All right. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead. This is already downloaded. Funnily enough, as you can see, it gave us 3 folders: Megascans, MS Presets, and we have our starter content here. Your Megascans is going to be sorted in your 3D assets. And there's our Desert Sand Corner Medium 01. There we go. This is a collection of things that you typically get for any asset. It's going to be the shader. I also call that the material. Technically, that's called a shader because a shader is applied with DirectX. That's it. DirectX is just the Z-buffer algorithm that lets you see a thing in 3D.
That's the last 3, right?
No, that's this thing right here.
Oh.
This is the shader.
Okay.
Here's the actual asset, and then we have our textures. This is what's called a diffuse map. This is a normals map. We'll talk about that here in 2 weeks when we start talking about materials. And this is called a DPR texture. That's a new one for me. That means displacement and roughness. We'll talk about that when we get there. But everything that you need to assemble this asset is downloaded and placed right here. Mr. Figueroa, then what's MS Presets? Do not touch anything in MS Presets unless you know what you are doing. That's a file library that Megascans uses to assemble all assets. Unless you know what you're doing, do not touch anything in there. You will break all of your assets. Excuse me, all your Megascans assets. We will get in there and we will mess around with it, but just trust me for now. Everything that Megascans can do, including things like decals, billboards, foliage, etc., is downloaded. So if you download any other Megascan stuff, congratulations. You can just use it. Adding an asset or any asset is as simple as, nope, we do not have to use the Add to Project button anymore. If we are adding something from the content browser, all we need to do is grab the asset, drag and drop into the scene, and it should work immediately. In fact, that's just what I did. Now any asset that you bring in can be brought in, modified, so on and so forth. Placed. Let's go ahead and look at the open side. Cool. I'm going to Control Z that. And there we go. There is our asset, ready to do all kinds of cursed nonsense, whatever you want to do with it. Now, it's just an asset, but let's explore some of these ideas a little bit here. I'm going to go ahead, just for an example's sake, and I'm going to go ahead and grab the high quality asset. I'm going to download that, just so I can show the difference. And I'm going to go ahead and add the high quality asset. Cool. Should have been added. Sometimes it can get a little bit weird about adding stuff because it already downloaded it. In fact, I'll have to do this slightly differently. Let me do it this way. This is the low quality asset. The low quality asset is typically going to be at your game style resolution. That's probably a little bit too low for game style resolution, but this is what the asset looks like. I'm going to go ahead and take a screenshot of this so we can see what it's actually physically doing. Screen snip that just so I can see it. Go ahead and open that up. Cool. We'll talk about those view modes when we get there. Oops, sorry. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Now, it's asking me, hey, this is already used. What are you doing? Why are you trying to delete this? I'm just going to force delete here. And now I'm going to download the high resolution version of it. Cool. Now you'll see that the asset looks similar, but the quality of the geometry has improved, mostly because we have better textures on it. So that's essentially what you're downloading when you're downloading better quality objects. You are downloading, if not better geometry, you're downloading higher resolution textures, so on and so forth. It really is going to depend on what you are actually physically doing. But let me go ahead and grab one more thing here. Let me go ahead and delete that. I'm just going to delete the entire file. Force delete. Save everything while I still can. Let me grab the nanite file here. It doesn't like that I've done it that way. I'll just force it. Hold on. Let me grab another file to demonstrate this a little bit better. Here, I'll grab the neighboring file so we can see it. So it should be a little bit more obvious. Come on. There we go. It's going to be mad for a second, but watch. Okay, there we go. I grabbed the neighboring asset. This is a nanite object. For the purpose of this class, I generally discourage students to use nanite objects when available, mostly because nanite objects are essentially the uncompressed asset in its highest possible resolution, thrown through a compression algorithm that allows you to run the asset with millions of triangles. Nanite is great if you are trying to run an obscene amount of triangles or an obscene amount of geometry at any point in time, just for the sake of quality. As you can see, what I'm looking at through the view mode is essentially how the triangles and the clustering is optimizing my asset here. If I go ahead and take a look at my asset, we can see that this asset is using, let me see how many triangles. I'm looking through the side, I'm looking through the, wow, that's not even, oh, I'm looking at the wrong one. This is using 12,000 plus nanite vertices, which means that it's using something like maybe 80 or 90,000 triangles. When you start adding a bunch of these assets together, it starts to essentially allow the engine to optimize all of those assets in its own way. I generally discourage students from downloading nanite assets without knowing how they work. We'll talk about this a little bit more in the future when we're actually doing outdoor world building and what nanite is going to do to your performance. But this gives you an idea of what you can use the asset store for when it comes to downloading anything that you need. So as you can see, a nanite asset is going to always look a lot better. Look at how close we can get at just the detail. Yeah, it looks a little jaggy, but that's because we're not supposed to see them that close. Versus something like this. This is you versus the person they told you not to worry about. Granted, this is always going to run better for obvious reasons. Question?
I was gonna say you recommended the nanite version. Is there anything wrong with using low resolution or low?
I don't recommend the nanite version.
You don't recommend? Oh, okay.
Well, unless your machine can really.
Okay. So low
Most
res
game
will be
engines
better.
don't want to handle nanite assets
Okay.
anyways.
So the low res is better? Or?
The medium res is probably going to be better, but it gives you an idea of what the assets look
I
like.
like the low poly aesthetic of the low res one.
And it looks probably fine in most cases. Alright. Let me save everything while I still can. So, in order to test this properly, I need a character. I'm going to hit play, and nothing happens. In fact, I'm in the game, but I'm able to travel through things. I apologize for the lag. Let me drop the scalability down a little bit more so we can get a little more speed. Oh yeah, that's exactly what I want. Let me go ahead and rotate this so that X is forward. Moves over. I'll scale it up for the sake of scaling it up. Perfect. Alright. This could be any asset, but generally speaking, if you are adding assets through Megascans, what's going to happen is you're not going to have any collision. Let's test that. I'm going to add a character to my environment so that we can actually test this out. I'm going to go into the content drawer, add feature content pack, and I'm going to add the third person. Typically speaking, if I'm going to be making a game or testing out something, I will typically always add a character or make a character from scratch. It's just going to be something that moves around on screen. This is easier to test for the purposes of Game Design 1. Adding a character is probably one of the first things that anybody should kind of get used to because it's just what you should do. Now I'm going to add this to my third person, and I'm going to add this to project. This is where students are going to get hung up. Cool. Now if I hit play, nothing happens. I don't have my third person, I don't have anything. This is where, even if you have an asset downloaded, you still need to set the engine up to allow it to see assets. Now, if you start a project with third person, that's going to be set up for you. That doesn't mean you start every project with third person or first person. That just means that it does it for you if you make a project that's supposed to do that. However, since we started this project with no preset file, let's go ahead and add, let's go ahead and create the connection that allows us to utilize the third person character. If we go ahead and bump open the content drawer, we see that the third person folder and its structure is at the bottom. We have access to characters, we have access to third person stuff, we have access to everything that we need, including its animations. Come on, Quinn. I'm gonna give it a sec. Quinn is just Manny, but with fewer animations. So in order to get this working, we need to change something called a game mode. Game mode is what changes the designation of the controller, what piloting is essentially pawn possession, what runs when we hit play, so on and so forth. Let's go ahead and change this right now. Now there's a few ways that we can do this. If we go into settings, and then we go into world settings, we can override the default game mode right down there. Does everybody see that? Now you can see it's set to none. If I go ahead and change this from none to BP third person game mode, and then I hit the play button, we now have access to our character. Now this is what students are going to do. They're going to hit the play button and they're going to try to move around and nothing's going to happen. Whenever you create something in the Unreal Editor, if your mouse is visible, that means you have not taken possession yet. Click the screen. Shift F1 for mouse cursor. We'll talk about that in a sec. But now I've taken possession, and now my character moves. Of course, this is still not solved. But now we can move around our characters. If we hit Shift F1, we can release the control from the mouse, and this allows us to go into the environment, or rather into the UI, to start making, if not changes, any changes made during play are not permanent, they're just for testing purposes. But now I can go ahead and go through the UI and just use my mouse normally. However, if I repossess the screen by clicking on it, I take control of the character again. Personally, I use F8, which is called depossession. When I depossess a character, I can move around the world, I can move around the environment, I can see what's actually physically happening, and if I need to, I can click on this button right here, or I can wiggle the screen and press F8 again, and then take possession of the character. Congratulations, you now know how to navigate game modes, or at least how to get in and out of your game mode. This is what we refer to as a play mode. I will typically refer to this as something called PI. PI means play in editor. I did not make up that nomenclature, that's just what Epic calls it. Play in editor is essentially, hey, the engine and the game will run as though it is trying to play itself. So right now, the engine is running the game and it's handling all of the lifting related to actually playing the game. This is not a game in structure, but is a game in interaction, in the sense that we have a character, we have a controller, we have a camera, we have everything that we need functionally to kind of make this visually look like a game, and it is in a testable state. If you need to change this for whatever reason, the play window or the play menu is right here. If I click on these three dots, by default, when we hit play, also Alt-P for those of you who want to do the hotkeys, will let you bring up the editor to play in different modes. We have the selected viewport, which is what this is. If I hit play, or if I hit Alt-P, take possession. Woo! Sorry about that. We have new editor window. This opens up another editor window. This is typically useful if you have a second or a third monitor. I almost never use this unless I need to test out the environment, or I need to test out what the game environment looks like on its own screen. Typically I'll have another monitor set up for this. You see how the icon changes? Standalone mobile. Don't use this one because games are typically not going to be set up for mobile. It's going to run its own process. Stay away from this one. Standalone game essentially is the same thing. It lets it run on just its own game thread, which means that the engine is going to wait to see if it can build out the game. We'll talk about this a little bit later when we're actually putting together our prototype executables much later. Essentially, we'll be able to kind of build an executable that you can deploy on somebody's machine and then play the game like you would just any other game. And of course, Simulate. We'll talk about Simulate some more in the future, but what Simulate does is if you have any game mechanics that don't rely on the character being functionally in the game, this allows you to test the environment without actually putting the character into the world. We use this one pretty rarely, but typically you're going to be using, if not selected viewport, then PI. Both of these are PI. This one's in the viewport and this one's in a new window. Okay. So what you're looking at right now is two of the major types of assets that the Unreal Editor likes using. SMAs, which are static mesh actors. Anything that is on the stage that you can see is referred to as an actor. An actor is typically a composite of a bunch of different elements that work in conjunction with the editor to define what those actions are limited to. Not how much it can do, it's how little it can get away with doing and still do the thing that it needs to do. and a skeletal mesh. We'll talk about the skeletal mesh here shortly. Oh, I forgot to delete the other ones. And there we go. So as you can see over on the left, or excuse me, on the right, this is designated as static mesh actor. Any asset that is a static mesh can be accessed over here in the details panel by looking at its asset and looking at whatever material that's applied to it on an element by element basis. If I double click on the static mesh, this opens up what's called the static mesh browser or the static mesh editor. Depends on what you want to call it. The static mesh editor basically is a composite of all of the behavior by default that the Unreal Engine will allow you to do to a static mesh. Bear in mind, this is only for the actual mesh, not for any game behavior. Game behavior we'll talk about later. In this window, if we press L and left click, we can rotate around the light to see what the physical asset is doing, but this only rotates the light in this window so we can see what the asset is physically doing. We also have the ability to show things like whatever collision. Right now, if I click on simple or convex or complex collision, it won't show any simple collision, but it will show complex collision. And it allows us to use the different view modes to see what the asset is actually physically doing. For example, we can look at it in its unlit view, which means that all the light is turned off. We can look at it in wireframe, which I use a lot for optimizing assets. We can do detail lighting, which shows the asset with no color, but its normal map, and also its roughness map. Lighting only, which shows the asset with no details, just the asset as it would be in its geometric face. If the asset has any reflections, this is what the asset would be reflecting. Obviously, the asset has no reflections because it doesn't work that way. But everything, this is like that SpongeBob episode where everything is covered in chrome. Player collision illustrates whether or not an asset has collision. Where's our asset? It doesn't have collision. But it has visibility collision. Visibility collision basically just says what the camera can see. Question?
I tried double clicking it and it didn't pop up nothing though.
What did it give you?
No, it didn't do anything.
Let me check real quick.
Like I double it.
Mm-hmm. Visibility collision is what the camera sees. Do not get those two confused. Visibility collision is what the camera can interact with, what is visible. Visibility collision is just showing, hey, the camera can see a thing. Mr. Figueroa, when is visibility collision going to be useful? When something is accidentally invisible, but its collision is still valid? Or when something is opposite, the visibility is valid, but the collision is broken? It's a good way to check the opposite. Optimization view modes, we'll talk about these in the future. And level of detail coloration, we don't have to worry about that. Alright, so we can see that this asset has no collision. Let's talk about adding collision. When we import an asset, it will naturally have collision to it, but assets that are brought in from Megascans will almost never have collision to it. Why? Because the size of the asset gets a little bit larger if it has collision, and Epic trusts you to kind of add your own collision as necessary. Do you have to export this asset into Maya to build its own collision? Funnily enough, you're allowed to, but you don't need to.
When you select add asset again, what option do you get?
For...
Oh, you go back to your import and just pull that.
Oh, I just drag and drop it directly once it's already downloaded. That's okay, folks. We're here to learn it. All right. I'm going to go ahead and show simple collision. Well, obviously nothing's going to show because there's no collision to it. But let me go ahead and add some collision. We can go through up here, or we can add collision through here. let me go ahead and let's do the really cursed method. I'm just gonna go ahead and add a sphere collision, and then I'm gonna save, and we're gonna take a look at this player collision. Congratulations, you now have collision to your asset. Let's go ahead and go back, save this asset by hitting the save, and I'll go back to my starter level, and I'm gonna go ahead and hit play, and congratulations, it's fixed. Obviously this isn't fixed, but now you know how to add at least the basis of some collision. Most games are not necessarily about having perfect collision, but about keeping people trapped inside the box, or keeping people trapped inside the gameplay, so to speak. We don't want people to leave. If they can leave, if they have too much agency, they're gonna leave. So we try to make sure they can, either by means of forcing them to stay in an area, or we have assets that collide. In this case, I'm gonna go back to the asset, and if you ever close this window, if you have an asset selected, hitting Control B will let you find its asset in the browser, or wiggle the screen. Control E will open up its relevant editor. So you don't even need to go and double click, you can just hit Control E. We can interact with the collision by clicking on it, and if we really want to, we can move it around. I have no idea why you would want to move the collision around like that, but you get the idea. I'm going to delete the collision, and I'm going to try to solve this by adding better collision. Typically speaking, I'm going to go ahead and close the window here. Typically speaking, adding one of these options will almost certainly give you a better collision that you already had. I'm going to go ahead, I'm not going to add a sphere, a capsule, or a box. I'm going to add these. What they are essentially are how many sides to the mesh and what orientation the collision is going to be in. So typically I like to orient on Y just to see what's happening, but we can see what's physically happening. Let's go ahead and try to add 10 DOP Y simplified collision. That's actually not terrible. It's not great, but this works okay. And so what it's done is it's generated some collision for us. And if we go ahead and hit save, and I go to player collision, look at that. Now this is not going to be perfect. But it's close enough as far as the game is concerned. Compared to a sphere.
Would there be a reason why some games, I guess, allow you to collide a little bit more than other assets in the game?
Yeah, some games have IKFK where the character will put their hand on a thing, or is there a reason? No. Usually it's just like preference to the level designer or whatever they want. I wish I could tell you that, no, it's always done this way. It doesn't work that way. Whatever works. Whatever is going to fulfill the simulacra of what the engine or the game is supposed to do. Now the different options, I went ahead and deleted my collision by hitting delete. We can go ahead and look at the other types of collision. You can see the orientation that looks basically the same because this is just a box. This adds slightly more faces. This adds more faces, so it gives you a little bit more accuracy. So all of these are generally relatively useful. I usually run through these before I start making my own custom collision. Now, there is the option to do something called auto convex collision. Let's go ahead and play with that real quick. I'm going to click on that and it's going to open up this option down here. This gives you an idea of how many hulls, how many vertices, and how precise the object is supposed to be. So since this is essentially a box, we can just go ahead and hit apply. And it's going to calculate some collision for us. That's actually pretty okay, but the problem with this is that the collision comes out in chunks. Now, this is not inherently a problem, but it becomes a problem if this asset starts making up tens of thousands of assets. And since this asset is an assembly asset, how precise does the collision need to be? Not very, right? Question.
So is that tied to the whole count or is that separate? The number
That's
of,
tied to the hull
the
count.
number of
Let's go
pieces.
ahead and
So if
let's
you
go ahead
reduce
and
the whole
do that.
count to one, would it just make one piece?
It would try. That's actually pretty good. Let's try this. Delete this. Increase this to about 25 and increase accuracy to about 50%. Did I miss? Takes a second to cook it. That's not bad. That's actually really good. We click on that. It's ugly. It's suboptimal because ideally, the more triangles you have in your collision, even though they are very cheap, there's a cost, right? But this is good. I mean, I'm not going to have a problem. Look, if you're designing a game and you find that you're slowing down because of your collision, you've got other problems. You've got other bigger problems in your game than collision. If that makes any sense. Question?
Since the collision's separate, if you're like moving them around, like if you were to duplicate it, would you fuse them together?
Let's go ahead and test that out. I'm going to keep this collision. We can see that it is set up this way. Now collision doesn't fuse. But you can see that the collision interacts in the sense where it's like you have two colliding assets on top of each other, essentially it becomes one contiguous piece.
Yeah. No, I meant like do you fuse it with the objects that the collision's on? Because the collision was like separate from the Brock mesh. So
Collisions are always separate.
Yeah.
What he's saying is if you duplicate that asset, will the collision also duplicate? Basically, you wanted to reuse the asset multiple times.
Oh,
And you wanted that same collision.
when you're editing an asset in the asset editor, it edits it at the highest most level. Everything that happens in that editor happens to all of those assets at the same time.
Okay.
So for example, here, let me bring out several instances of this rock here. So since I have 4 instances, and I'm going to go ahead and hit Control E to edit it, and I'm going to go ahead and delete the collision and add something really cursed. It edits all instances of a said actor. They are not different actors. They are staged as separate instances of the same actor, if that makes sense. If we look over here, yes, they are SMAs, but they are all referencing the same static mesh. These are just visual instances. That's how the engine remains performant. All right. Let me delete this, delete these. All right. Let me make sure I'm covering everything. We'll have a break here pretty shortly. We talked about that. Before we go on break, let me go ahead and also talk about our favorite person in the world. Oh yes, I heard someone say, "Oh no." Let's talk about the mannequins. By default, the mannequins are great to use to test out elements of the game, and we won't get too far into what they can and can't do, but we'll talk about their animations later on. By default, in most cases when you're testing out a game, a lot of games start by using Manny or Quinn, depending on what you feel like using, to test out game mechanics. They come fully rigged. They come with a controller cooked in. We'll talk about the controller when we're talking about controller types around week 7. We will not use Classic Manny. Classic Manny is on the far right. Poor Classic Manny has a much simpler skeleton. He doesn't really work as well as he used to, but you know, he's not broken. He's a great way to reference the engine in general. New Sexy Manny is on the left, and then we have Quinn. All of them are slightly different, but this is what a skeletal mesh is. A skeletal mesh is essentially a static mesh actor, but with extra pieces. Let's take a look. I'm going to go ahead and open up the skeletal mesh asset by double-clicking the window. So just like we talked about a regular SMA, static mesh asset, a skeletal mesh oftentimes contains not just the actual character, but an array of bones. Let me show the bones. We don't have to worry about this for now. I'm just demonstrating it. Where are my bones? Collection of bones. Now, if you're wondering what the connection between the hands and then the right hand and the root are, is it's basically the ability for Quinn and Manny to have IK, or basically like holding a gun or holding something that lets your arms do that. That's what essentially that controls. Basically, skeleton. Lovely skeleton. Animations. We see our skeleton animation.
So basically the DP
Mhm.
that just helps like causality, like
IKFK, yeah, just movement around. An ADP, also known as an animation blueprint. And a physics body. All a skeletal mesh is a static mesh, essentially the geometry of the character, plus its skin weights, plus its textures, plus its bones, plus its physics, plus its animations. But at the end of the day, it's still just geometry. Just geometry that moves. Question?
So I saw you open up the animation blueprint earlier. Is there any class that would be like covered at all, or no?
I'll cover it a little bit in the second class, but
Yeah.
animation blueprints it's just a, you gotta learn blueprints first, but animation blueprints essentially is a behavior that controls things like locomotion. Let me take a look at that.
I was trying to wrap my head around that myself, and I just couldn't figure it out.
Let me do that crap. Locomotion, state machine, main states. Here we go. There's like the jumping and moving state machine. I'll explain state machines much later, and we'll try to build one. It is somewhat of a more advanced concept, and it's even harder to teach if people don't know animation, which I don't expect you guys to all know. Who does know animation, like confidently? Well, at least a couple of you. It can become very difficult to cover an animation state machine without knowing animation, but I will cover it just so people can understand it. Question?
How did you bring up the add third person preset?
Ah. Bump the window, add, feature content pack, third person. We can also add first person if we really want, but cancel. Alright. Now if we hit play, we see that we can interact with all of our namesakes. Because they're dragging the scene, they're not going to interact with us, so on and so forth. So far, we understand grabbing assets from Megascans. We understand how their collisions come in not functioning and how to add some collisions. We understand at least somewhat the mesh editor. We understand that there's a variety of different mesh types. Mesh types generally have more complexity to it. Everything is just geometry. Really, everything is just an actor. All things are actors. Anything that can go on the stage is an actor. As long as you know that think of it this way, anything that you can see in the editor viewport is a box. Behaviors go in that box. The more behaviors, the more complex the asset. But at the very end of the day, it's still just a box that contains a bunch of different things that the asset can do. The more things that asset can do, the more that you can do during a game or while it's behaving in a certain way. We'll talk about that later. But when we come back from break here, we still need to talk about gray boxing theory. We're going to talk about some very basic blueprint hello world. We're going to talk about sky domes and sky spheres. We're going to talk about how lighting kind of generally works. We're going to talk about rendering, and then we're going to talk about DSPs and gray boxing. And then we're going to talk about an interactive grand space. I don't expect people to be experts at making them. This is the first assignment is essentially just a Fisher-Price approach to, I want people to get their hands into the editor. I want them to drag things in there. I want them to put something together because I want to see where everyone is at. And then by the time we get to our actual world building stuff, once we've had a few weeks to cook, the difference is usually pretty dramatic between what people understand and then what people know. So we'll talk about the assignment when we get there. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break, come back at 9:44, and we'll continue onwards. All right, downloaded some stuff here. All right. Why are you mad at me? There we go. Close a few things. Close that. Okay. Let me make sure I've got everything that I need. All right. So, got some of the basics down. Every asset that can be modified can be opened up in the details panel. Like for example, I can go ahead and take a look at other things. If I really wanted to see, for example, the material, I can go ahead and double click on the material instance. This takes me to the material instance. We'll talk about this in a few weeks. And if I go ahead and double click on the parent, for example, this brings up all the information about how the graph works for the material graph. We'll talk about that in a couple weeks. But let me talk a little bit about custom assets here, which is where students are going to run into some problems as well. First and foremost, before we start going into that, let me talk about the other store that we can use to kind of get additional assets. If we want, we can go ahead and I typically navigate to the store from here. But like for example, if I have my launcher up and I go to say my library, or if my marketplace, let's see what's in the marketplace. Come on, marketplace. The more times you click it, the better it works. And let me go ahead and search for free content. Oh, that's animation stuff, forgot about that. You know what? Let me look at the Megascan. Let me find the actual Megascan stuff. This is Megascan's chopped wood. Okay, I mean that's free. You can occasionally find packs of assets packs of assets on the marketplace that are designed to be used for games purposes. Now, in this particular case, you see that I found some assets that are for free. I'm going to go ahead, for example, you don't have to follow along here, you can just add an asset through the marketplace. I'm going to go ahead and hit free here. Come on, I said free. And it's going to pop up with add to project. At this point, all you need to do is find the project that you want to add it to, and then add it to the project whenever you feel like it. Now, most assets are going to run into this problem, as you can see. Asset not compatible with version 5.4. That's because if you can see down here, this asset hasn't been updated for 5.4. Oh no, does that mean it's not going to work? Maybe. Let's find out. I'm going to add this to my project, and if the project doesn't show up, you can go ahead and hit show all projects. Here's a My 203 starter project that I can work with. You just want to make sure that you can add the latest version of the project that you can. Typically, anything in 5.anything is going to work in 5.4, but I'm going to go ahead and add this to the project. It's going to cook it down. It looks like it's going to take 2 gigs. How fast is our internet today? Not very.
It's
Okay. What's that?
it's been inconsistent today. It's been speeding up and slowing
Mm-hmm.
down.
I'm gonna let this cook down, just so people can see what's actually physically happening. So what we're doing here is we're downloading an asset that should essentially be ready to rock and roll, but we'll take a look at it once it actually downloads. The other thing that I want to talk about as well. Oh. Where did I put that? Our custom assets as well. Most students are going to have their own assets that they're going to want to bring into Unreal. So I'll talk about how to import those as well. So right now our asset is downloading. No, you don't have to only work with downloaded assets, but believe it or not, it makes games development a lot easier. Back in the day, it was really difficult to have access to any finished assets to be able to make games, or at least to put something together. We had to there was no asset store, really. You could download a few things, but it's mostly just people putting stuff on Polycount. It was very difficult to collected a bunch of assets to be able to throw together a demo or throw together any kind of game. Now you guys and gals have assets to Megascans and the Unreal Marketplace. They're not the same place, for the record. And now you can add anything to your project that you need. It's amazing. I've never seen anything like it. But it's a lot nicer to be able to have a collection of assets that you don't actually need to author your own assets to build games to begin with, if that makes any sense. You can build a prototype game without having to worry about it. Go ahead.
Since this one wasn't like optimized for 5.4, is there a way to do that yourself, or is that just not worth it?
It's just not worth it. It just means that the asset hasn't been tested in 5.4.
Okay.
All right. So it looks like it's done adding. It doesn't give us any warning, but if we go to our actual project here, let me go ahead and minimize a couple of these. Ah, there it is. Megascans chopped wood. I'm just gonna drag this out into the pile over here, or drag this out into the world. We're gonna give it a second to cook down its textures. As you can see, it's having to go through a few things, so it's compiling our textures. Come on, you can do it. I believe in you. Yay! Are those nanite? They're not. That's good. Look at that wood pile. That's a great wood pile. Look at that. Amazing. Is collision on? Let's find out. Oh no. For something that complex, what would be the right strategy?
Delete it.
What's that?
Delete it.
Then cut.
Delete the asset or delete the collision?
Yes.
For something that complex, you'd have to use the auto-convex decomposition. Let me go ahead and make something real quick. Again, I definitely use the view modes to check, to make sure that my collision is working before anything is happening. We can see that it's not working, so what I can do, I can have the asset selected. I'm going to Control E to open up its static mesh browser. And I'm just going to very quickly go into my auto-convex collision. I think I can get away with 2. We'll add, this is going to need to max that out, and then the whole precision could be about 50%. What's the rule here? Vibes. Test it, see if it works. I'm gonna hit apply. Good enough for government work. Now that's not pretty.
You're just simplifying the actual shit of.
Oh, didn't save it. Let's Let's see, make sure that I'm actually applying that. Play, test it out. Oh, where'd it go?
It disappeared.
It's gone. Let me go ahead and say that. Sometimes Epic can be a little bit weird about that stuff. Let me save everything. Why is this behaving weirdly? Let's find out. Definitely not that.
Player inside of the folder?
There it is. It just didn't like how I dragged it out. Scale that up. Press end. Say play. Can I jump on top of you?
Yes.
For the record, you were asking about the benefits of having IKFK. Put your leg up. Thank you. That's why. Because the character will automatically put its foot up on geometry that it can that's considered valid. Screenshot that for the takes. Alright, so that's working. Did that actually get stomped down? It did. It just really... Man, that's not straight at all.
This is the worst wood pile ever.
That's a terrible wood pile. We could fix that with some sculpting. Anyways, so now we know how to import assets from both the big marketplaces. Let's talk about our own custom assets. Let's say we put something together in Maya. Now, I've got an asset here, something I worked with in the past. I'm going to demonstrate how to bring in your own assets. For me, if I'm going to bring in my own assets, I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to call it assets. And let me go ahead and make another folder in there and call it whatever my asset is supposed to be. I'm going to call this Jet Booster because that's what I used to call it. Any asset that can be imported using the import function or drag and drop. I'm going to go through the import function, or rather the import button for now, and then we'll talk about drag and drop when I'm shortcutting my way through it. I'm going to go ahead and hit import, and I'm going to navigate to my asset. Now I'm going to hit open. Now this asset is saved as an OBJ and not an FBX. This is the OBJ window. Essentially what it's telling you, or what it's going to say, is hey, this asset has all of these settings. Is there anything in it that you want to change? I'm going to go through it very quickly to see if I want to change anything. No, doesn't look like I want to change anything. I'll just leave it alone. And I'm going to hit import. Cool. Now, because it was made this way, it's going to import in the wrong direction. Importing and exporting are based largely on how Maya or Blender exports. Maya exports with Y up. Can you tell that this was made in Maya? Well, it's just going to be weird inside of Unreal. We can fix that, but I'll show you how to fix that here in a sec. As you can see, my asset imports. This is made in Maya. My asset was, just kind of brought in. If we go ahead and show our simple collision, the collision is going to be auto-generated by Unreal at runtime. So when you import something, it auto-generates the collision. Is this collision right for this particular asset? Maybe, depending on what you're trying to do. Typically speaking, you can import collision of an object in Maya by creating another asset called _UCX. We won't talk about that too much. Talk to your 3D professor about exporting a collision file for Maya. Funnily enough, if you are interested in exporting it, there's also some documentation in the Unreal documentation that talks about how to do that step by step. Now, I'm not going to go over it. I'm just kind of showing what this process is for importing your own assets. Now, our asset has indeed been imported. But this isn't perfect. As you can see, there's definitely a problem with how it imported. Now, there's a few things you can do. If this was an FBX, we could do an in-place edit, which means we could rotate the asset and then automatically save it. This is an OBJ, so OBJs are going to be a little bit tougher to work with. If we were to drag out our asset as it was, our characters would be a little confused because that's not placed in the correct orientation. I'm going to go ahead and re-import that. I'm just going to delete it. And I'm just going to re-import that. You can also do it this way. Drag and drop. And I believe the rotation is 90 on X, Y, Z. Let's find out. Let's preview that. Okay. Alright, it looks okay. Question?
I've spent hours in Maya, so I think that's correct.
Let's find out. I'm going to hit import.
Now for OBJs, when that does pop up, is there anything particular you're looking for?
Oh, wrong one. Go ahead.
Like when that window pops up and you said you were checking to make sure everything was kind of correct. Was there anything that
No, it didn't have any of the settings that I needed to change.
Okay.
Okay, that doesn't look correct. The nice thing was it imported our other textures, but we'll talk about that in a sec. Let me go ahead and delete that. Let's try again. This is why I prefer FBXs. Drag this back in. That means that it's probably this one. Oh my gosh, is that not correct? No, it's not. Let's find out what forward is on. I wish I still had the Maya file for this because it'd be easier to figure that out. Let me open this correctly here. Let's see. Drag this in. Offset translation, offset rotation.
You might have to do two different.
I might have to do two. Let me see what's going on here. Let's see. What direction is it facing here? Oh no, that imported correctly. Oh, there it was. There we go. So that imported correctly. Control Z that, please. Come on, Unreal, do not crash. Crash so I can show them how to fix it. Notice that I typically do not use the gizmos. I use the hotkeys for rotation and whatnot. Do you see my control buttons put on screen over on the bottom right?
No, you just put it on.
Yep. Sorry, it was over here. That's just what I'm used to. It's not a crime to use the gizmo. Gizmo's there for you guys to use. Alright, we have our asset. Now, obviously, it didn't get brought in with any textures. If you want to apply our textures, I'm just going to go ahead and bring the textures into the environment here. It's that easy. Drag and drop. Let me save everything. Now, in order for an asset to have a texture, we actually need to make a material. I'm going to talk about the very basics of that. Essentially, we have three textures. We have an ambient occlusion, I have my color ID map, and then we have our normals map. Well, that's not very pretty. Let's go ahead and fix that. I'm going to go ahead and create a material. Whenever you make an asset or bring in a custom asset or need a material, the right-click window is going to be your best friend. We can go into add and go into here, it's the same thing, but the right-click window is where we make a lot of the stuff that goes on in the content drawer. You can see I right click the slate, and for those of you wondering what the slate is, if you ever ask or hear me say click the slate, it means click the black background of whatever the window is that I am currently in. That is usually your context sensitive slate. So I'm going to go ahead and right click the slate and create a quick material, and I'm just call this m_junk material. This is our material window. Now I'm not going to get too far into this. We have a week dedicated to talking about all things materials, but I'm going to assemble something real quick. I'm going to grab my textures, just drag these bad boys in here. I'm just putting this together real quick so I can see what it looks like. I know my video memory is exhausted. Stop being so tired. Do that real quick. See what that looks like. And I'll cover all of this. I'm just kind of demonstrating something that we can do. Again, we'll talk about this when we get to it. I'm not trying to freak anyone out. This is not required for the assignment tonight. I'm just doing this because I think it's nice if people get a chance to see what I'm actually physically doing. Why are you mad? Oh, of course that's why you're mad. Red is a fast color, so red is going to be faster. Let's put some details on it. Take a look at this real quick. We'll talk about the rules of we'll talk about the rules of physically based materials at some point in the future. Good enough. We'll accept that. But there we go. You get the idea. An asset with its associated shader and its textures to go with it. That's kind of the basics of assembling an asset very quickly, especially if you don't have access to the original asset. You can put together anything that you really want. If we really wanted to, and we wanted to be really cursed about this, we could put any texture that we want on any asset. This is going to be horrible. Oh, this is going to be so cursed.
Petrified now.
It doesn't matter. The engine will let you do just about anything. As long as you apply a thing, you can literally do whatever the engine is just kind of inherently set up to do. But we get the idea. We can drag and drop. We can set up anything that we need to. Come on, can we undo that? Yes, we can. Let me save everything while I still can. That just saved the level. I need to save all in here. Good. Okay. So, we've talked about managing assets. We've talked about the mesh editor, mesh types. We've talked about static meshes versus skeletal meshes. We talked about importing. Let me talk very quickly about sky domes, sky spheres, and just general lighting. Porter Robinson, Look at the Sky. No, it's not a great song. It's a great song. The default sky in Unreal is essentially the default sky atmosphere, dynamic sky. We'll talk about this a little bit more when we're getting into world building. The sky itself, by default, if you're working on a default level, is going to be the sky atmosphere here and the volumetric clouds. In order to control the sun position is actually not your skylight, it is your directional light. Sounds kind of confusing, right? Because you'd assume that it's called the skylight, it's supposed to be sky, right? Skylight is more like the light that you get from the scattering of light once it gets a ground bounce. Whereas directional light is, for us, it's the sun. It's an infinitely large cannon of light that, well, it's not infinitely large, but for us it is, right? It's a large cannon of photons that travels on screen and hits the environment that we see. Because a directional light is beholden to standard rules of things like rotation, if we rotate the directional light, we also rotate the time of day. Look at that. There's actually a better interface for this. And it's kind of a clumsy hotkey, but hear me out. You take your left hand, you put your thumb on control, and then you hit the L key with your index finger, and you hold it. As long as you hold it, moving the mouse around will let you position the sun anywhere that you want based on this interface over on the kind of bottom right. You see that interface, right? You see the light placement gizmo, as you can see. If I let it go, it'll disappear. It was always going to make me a liar. Control L. And do you see what's actually happening with the directional light as I move the lighting gizmo? This just points the direction that the light is coming from. But you can also tell that that light is coming from so on and so forth. If I rotate this around, you can see how that light reacts in real time. Pretty straightforward. The default sky in Unreal 2 is reasonably expensive. The reason why is typically the clouds in the sky itself are going to be very expensive. There's another alternative that you can use that is not necessarily the sky atmosphere. We'll talk about the sky atmosphere a little bit more when we're talking about world lighting, but again, I'm just kind of very quickly covering what the environment looks like and how the environment and world building works in Unreal. I'm going to go ahead and delete the volumetric clouds, and I'm going to go ahead and delete the sky atmosphere. Now, we still have access to our sunlight, obviously, but now our environment is going to look a little bit different because we simply do not have anything that we can use. However, if we go into settings, I bumped open the content drawer. Be very careful in here. There's an option that allows us to show engine content. Does everybody see that on the bottom right? I'm going to go ahead and click that to enable engine content. bottom left, do you see how I clicked on the engine content and typed in the words BP_sky? And does everyone see that a new sky sphere is part of the engine content? Ah. You can't see engine content until you show it right there. Mm-hmm. Every window has kind of its own different settings. Go ahead.
Oh, no.
I'm going to take this BP sky sphere and I'm going to drag this out into the world. Now it's going to look like this. Does everybody see kind of how it's half and half? That's because by default we have an SM sky sphere in the world. It's there to catch extra lighting and whatnot, so the engine knows to terminate its lighting. If we just take our SM sky sphere and delete it, because we replace it with a new sky sphere, congratulations, we have a sky again. But notice that it's not as ornate. Notice that it's not as pretty. Let's go ahead and click on the sky, and the sky itself has a few settings that we can change. I'm going to go ahead and move this up so we can get some room. It's looking for a directional light actor. Let's give it one. Cool. Now if I rotate the position of the light, it's not going to update. However, if we click on refresh material, it does. The sky sphere is more optimized for games than sky atmosphere and atmospheric clouds. The reason why Epic defaults to it is because Epic utilizes a lighting solution called Lumen. Lumen is essentially a hobbled form of ray tracing, if you want to call it that. It is designed to make everything look really good at the cost of some amount of performance. I'm going to go ahead and fix the environment here. Good enough. Actually, I'll just do that. You don't have to worry about that for now. Good. There we go. Good enough for me. So it gives you an idea of what you can do with your environment in general. We'll talk about this a little bit more as we break down these systems further on down the line. But at the very least, you understand now that the sky can exist in a few different states. We have access to a simpler sky, which is what this is, by using the BP sky sphere. And let me go back to what it was before. I'm going to take my BP sky sphere and delete it. And I'm going to go ahead and add my sky atmosphere. Just going to move that over here. And my volumetric clouds. Woo, they're back. And then because I modified the exponential height fog to have some white in it so we didn't see that horrible blackness. There we go. We're back to exactly what we had. It is that simple. You're not married to one or the other. You can pick what kind of sky that you work with. The reason why you want a sky sphere over the dynamic sky that's in Unreal is because, well, I've never seen a game use the dynamic sky. Most games use sky spheres. But you can download your own. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we're getting into actual lighting. But that pretty much covers our sky domes and sky sphere discussion for now. I know there's a lot that we're covering. We talked about lighting, so on and so forth. Lighting is going to be important in general, but I'm not going to talk about too much about the difference between lumen and light mass just yet. We'll talk about that in its own week. Essentially, if you want to see what lumen is doing, Notice that I turned on the overview for Lumen, but nothing happened. That's because my scalability is too low for Lumen. Come on, don't crash. There we go. My poor machine is doing like a bunch of different things, so it's going to be a little slow. But you get the idea. Lumen is always going to be a little bit more dynamic because Lumen lighting is essentially real-time ray tracing. Most games don't utilize real-time ray tracing. A lot of games just put ray tracing on shiny surfaces. RTX does this a lot. It's going to depend on what you kind of want to do and what you can operate with. If you have enough horsepower, you'd be surprised what you can get away with. If you don't have a lot of horsepower like this machine, you're probably going to want to enable Lumen. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we're talking about lighting in general. Let me go ahead and go back to my medium scalability. That's going to disable Lumen. And even though we have the Lumen view mode on, it's not going to show up. Okay. Make sure we're covering everything I need to. Let's talk about gray boxing now when it comes to world building and environment building, just in general. I'm going to go ahead and delete some of this stuff now, and I know we're down to our last half hour or so, and that's good. We're making okay time. Let me get rid of this stuff because I don't need it anymore. No, not you. I still need you. My aim could be better. All right. Let me save everything. Let's talk about gray boxing here. Oh, is everything okay?
Yeah.
I thought you dropped your laptop or dropped your mouse. Okay. Let's talk about gray boxing. Gray boxing is the theory of taking an environment and building it out from elements that exist from a, say, smaller geometric perspective. And there's two tools that generally are used for gray boxing when it comes to building out levels and environments for Unreal. If we go into the Place Actors panel and we go over here, not to shapes, but to geometry, and I'll show the difference. I'm going to bring out this box here. That box is a little bit weirder looking in comparison to, say, a cube. I'm going to go ahead and bring out my friend the cube here, and we'll bring you up. We'll scale you up so you feel a little bit better about your size, and then we're going to press N to put you down. On the surface, these two are arguably the same shape. They're squares, right? They're cubes. But here's the trick. Does everybody see that? That cube is an SMA, static mesh actor. It's a mesh that has geometry, so on and so forth. This is not an SMA. This is what is referred to in Unreal as a brush or a brush actor. Brush actors are not geometry. They fake geometry by designating an area where geometry can be rendered and can be repurposed for whatever visual element that you need. I'm going to hit play and demonstrate kind of the similarities here. Brushes have collision. So do SMAs, and they otherwise behave exactly the same. The difference between a geometry brush and a shape brush is that a geometry brush, sorry, I flew out in the world. What's going on? A geometry brush can do things like this. I'm going to move this over here. That's a little weird how it moves, because if I move this other shape, it just kind of moves with me. This moves the volume that designates the shape in general. If I were to take, say, maybe a cylinder, I'm going to grab the cylinder out here and I'm going to scale this down. I'm going to add more sides. That's too many sides. And I'm going to move this over here. Move that up a little bit. Move that back over. It doesn't really matter. I'm just kind of demonstrating the process here. Okay, well, Mr. Figueroa, congratulations. You put something inside of something else. I did. Welcome to Boolean operations with brushes. Essentially, these assets are not designed for final, but they're a great way to create preliminary geometry to be able to test an environment or to build something out for a world depending on what you need. Go ahead.
Can you export this geometry?
Yes, you can. You want to do it this way. Where is my settings? Let me combine these two. That's fine. Where is that? I forget where it is. Oh my gosh, I'm out of my mind. Oh my gosh, I know I'm not crazy. Where is that? Where did I just put that? So I just converted that to a static mesh, and then I can file export selected, and it exports as an FBX. That's what gray boxing is essentially is. I'm glad you asked that question. Because we can use a preliminary setup here to designate probably the most important thing about level design, scale. So those elements can be exported once you convert them over into static meshes. So we all saw kind of how I did that. Let me do that again. Oh no, I converted. It's too late. I can't unconvert it. Once it's what has been bronzed cannot be unbronzed. What's that? Okay, did you get that reference? Let me go ahead and do this again. Let me grab the cylinder. In fact, I'm just going to throw these together. My cylinder brush here. I'm just going to go ahead and change it from additive to subtractive. That's weirdly cursed. Let me scale that down. There we go. Now the annoying thing about brushes is you can't really see them. You gotta select all three of these brushes. Oh, wrong cube. There we go. Under brush settings, under advanced, we can convert this to a static mesh. Let me make sure that I'm putting this in my actual assets folder here. That'd be horrible if I didn't. Cool. Call this iBeam SM. It's that simple. The other tool you can use to create placeholder or starter geometry is actually embedded up here in the modeling toolkit. Under create, there's this cute little thing right there called CubeGrid. I'm still getting used to this one myself because I still like doing it with Kitbash. CubeGrid is another way that you can set up to create geometry very quickly. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder here in my assets called CubeGrid. And I'm going to make sure that I have the level selected before I do this. I'm also going to go ahead and use the current folder as opposed to using an auto-generated folder since I already made one. Right down there. And I'm just going to do this real quick. I'll undo that so people can see how I did that. So you get the idea. What I'm doing here is I'm just using the cube grid to kind of build out geometry as I see fit. Now this tool, all the documentation for the tool is right there within the tool itself. This is not my favorite tool. I saw a question?
I put them in the gray box in subtract mode, but in subtraction.
You need two brushes.
Right, yeah, I have
Right.
an overlapping one, but it just the subtract one just disappears.
Take a look real quick.
I got just intersecting that else.
Usually we're operating the problem. This can be a little bit annoying. They don't have to be technically. That's what I hate about operating on these small screens. You said folks are not seeing what's going on. What? It really doesn't like that order of operation on the screens. I do not know why your settings are untruncated. It's missing these settings. Not in the sound switcher at all. Okay, so it's not me. Give me a sec, folks. I'm just kind of looking at what's going on here with his. What the world is going on?
I'm gonna stay here in the bottom. We can grab it tomorrow. Or if you wanna go inside.
It is set up properly.
Should work in theory.
It should work in
Well,
theory.
it's probably just work.
Yes. Well, stick around a little bit after class. We need to figure out why that's being weird. Okay, folks. Sorry about that. Let me show this real quick here. Let's play around with this a little more. Now, all I'm doing is making one giant actor. If I were to accept this, it has made one enormous actor. So the benefit to this is actually making smaller usable actors. So for example, if I were to delete all that, and I use cube grid again, and I wanted to say, okay, I want to make a, you know, a 1000 by 500 grid piece. I'm going to press E to bring it up a little bit, just so. That's about 1,000 right there. Cool. That's fine for me. Let's measure that out. And I'm just going to just knock in those sides because that's just kind of the vibes, right? Knock in those sides. Did I get knocked in the correct direction? Yes, it did. Do the same thing over here.
So you're insetting an extruder.
Essentially, yeah. I'm gonna hit accept. Now if I delete that piece, let's say now I can have it so that I can use it for assembly purposes. And now I can start maybe prototyping a level depending on what pieces that I'm going to use, right? Does everybody kind of see how that works? Cool. Now I have my level barrier if I need this, for example. Now, realistically, when it comes to building blockouts for environments, that's going to focus a little bit more on level design. If you're interested in level design, by and large, as far as theory is concerned, by all means, sign up for the level design class that focuses a lot more on level design as a theory as opposed to just assembling assets. But let me go ahead and shift gears here to something a little bit more advanced so people can kind of see what the general gist of what an environment can look like in a game that is not just relying on gray boxing and just leaving things as basic as they are. I'm going to go ahead and minimize that and bring up some previous work here. Come on, are you going to load without lagging? Por favor, I know you can run on it. I know you can run on it. Thank you. If you threaten the machine, it runs a little faster. This is a pretty good example of something that can be built in just a couple hours. It doesn't take, what's that?
Just a couple hours?
Just a couple hours, and I'll show you why. Now, I'm not going to expect anything of this kind of level, at least until the very end. But let me see if this is playable. I think it's not playable right now. Let me add feature content pack, third person, and let me go ahead and add that. Cool. Don't think it's playable. Do I have a player starting here? No, I don't. Everybody just saw Quinn like really naked for like a split second. Let's ignore that it's not finished. This entire environment is really just a compilation of this. Let me go ahead and eliminate some things so I can show people what this actually physically looks like. I'm going to use the show button here to turn off things like geometry. Let me turn off my static meshes. It just looks nice. It really isn't. Let me turn off my shadows. I'm going to press G for game mode to disable those little icons. So we can see what this actually looks like. I forgot I didn't fix that. It's fine. Going back to use defaults will allow us to kind of take a look at the environment. But let's kind of break this down piece by piece so that you can see how an actual world is essentially constructed. All of these rocks well, What if I told you that this is just a modified default Unreal asset? Let me add starter content. Where is it? Why can't I find it? Where are you? Hello, SM Rock. How you doing? That looks suspiciously similar. Zoom in a little closer. Let's not pay attention to that. No one saw it. Okay. What's that?
Glitch in the Matrix.
It's essentially the same thing. Except one has a rock texture and one has a texture that I grabbed from Megascans. So, let me kind of break it down pretty quickly. A lot of this geometry is essentially just SM cliffs. Do you see that right there? SM cliffs, SM cliffs, SM cliffs. Put SM cliffs. These are kind of some stairs that were already had, but they're kind of put together. You kind of see how that works. This is a plane. Let me fix that real quick. I'll show everybody how to do this at some point in the future. Good enough. All these trees, the same tree. All these rocks, slightly different rocks. They're all kind of the same, but they're just kind of placed. All of it is placed in the foliage toolkit. All these buildings are the same building, just with different trim pieces. This building and this building are basically the exact same thing, except for the fact that one has a fancy dome on it. And now these two buildings oh, wait, nope. It's got the scar that's visible in the wrong direction. There we go, that's okay. Stuff like this. Oh, wow. Mr. Figueroa, the sand is on those stairs. No, it's not. It's just shoved into the ground. Let me hit play here. Collision. What collision? Collision.
Yes, superpower.
No collision for the building.
Yes, superpower.
What collision? Also, the inside of the buildings don't actually have a thing. It's not designed to go inside, so you don't build what you're not supposed to see.
Nope.
Do you think this wall has collision?
Yes.
It does.
I knew it.
Charles won.
Essentially, yes, because most of it doesn't have collision. How do we verify? We can go into our player collision and we can see what actually collides. There's not a whole lot of collision in the environment, as you can see. Go back to lit mode. All of the height over here isn't actually height. It's just stuff that's floating in the air.
Not in camera view.
All of these taller buildings are not actually taller because we can't actually get over here. Let me start right here. Right click, play from here. Why am I following the rules? I can just run through the buildings. That's good level design, by the way. People will do the thing that you want them to do, even though they can do what they want. Like, that's good level design. That means that people are programmed to follow paths. Again, a lot of this is the simulacra of putting together environments. Let me show you how cursed it gets out here, because again, none of this is finished. What if I told you this entire level is just a straight line from out there where that tree is?
Map is
I
huge
did see it
though.
on the path that we took.
It's not that big. Question.
If like assuming everything that properly has like proper collision and everything, do the backward buildings that are not supposed to get to even need it?
I just want them to be taller. It's part of what's called the backdrop.
Yeah.
Essentially, the ability to be able
But
to see.
like since the front buildings would have collisions, so like you can't run through them, like would you need to
There's
even
a
give
there's
them
a
collision?
hallway back there that you can get back there. Good design means that all your collision works even if you don't use it.
Okay.
Because players are cunning
That's
and
why I was
they will
stopping.
get into places that you don't want them to.
True.
We don't leave it to chance. We want to make sure that everything is built somewhat properly.
Okay.
That's what I was asking earlier. So like,
Yeah.
like if your player
Woo!
avoids a
Yo, is that a pyramid?
When you go out of the world boundaries in Breath of the Wild.
Can you climb the pyramid?
Go
No
straight
collision,
through
no
it.
collision, no collision.
Hey. Oh, that pyramid has
Found it too.
But that pyramid randomly has collisions.
Yeah, this pyramid is the same pyramid, has no collision. But it's also not even on the map. This is part of what's called the backdrop. Backdrop is non-interactable space that players are not going to be able to get to, but creates the environment of kind of the visual fidelity of the space, right? So this gives you an idea of how environments are kind of assembled without having to assemble it yourself, just to see kind of how all of this is kind of laid out. It's really mostly about faking the look, so to speak, as opposed to, let's see, all right. How much time do I have left? I have 2 minutes. All right. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide this as an example so that people can kind of go ahead and play through it, because I don't have any love for this environment. But let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the assignment for tonight. Your assignment is assignment 1, interactive grand space. You at the very minimum need to have a third person character or an environment that is put together that we can run around and test it. Which means that I'm not expecting it to look like this, but you should utilize some of the tools that we covered tonight, which means importing assets, using your gray boxes, or downloading elements from the marketplace. Pick a pack, for example, if you really like to, and put together a small environment that you can run around in and just kind of, I don't want to say test because we're not testing mechanics, but the idea here is not necessarily to introduce level design, but to introduce the ability for people to use the Unreal Engine to start populating things like environments, know how to manage their assets, know how to at the very least apply things like textures, change the lighting, change the time of day, and manage the file in a way that's going to be at least somewhat useful. The Stipulations for the project are pretty straightforward. It's not. It's vague on purpose. Let me go ahead and bring this up. Design one. Keep it simple. That's why it's fairly vague. Use brush actors or actors in general to build a large environment. As a question, you do not have to answer those questions on a notepad or anything. Add materials, set styling, set scale. Practice using your hotkeys. If you want to, you can build one or two assets if you have them, or set up collisions. But essentially, what you want to do, oh, that's Old Manny right there, is to build a testable environment. It doesn't have to be this fancy. This actually has some custom shapes. But if you want to go ahead, oh, hey, it's the rock. It's several of the rocks. If you want to go ahead and put together something basic, you don't need to have a lot of texture. It can just look like this. You can see that the fog is pretty heavy. It doesn't have to have pretty lighting. But as you can see, is it's interactable. We have a character in the environment, and the character can run around and probably bump into the walls. This will give you a pretty good idea of how to kind of get your project started in general. Now, this is not a long-form project. This is just more learning. But your first interactive environment will prove to me that 1, you can add characters, 2, you can pilot them, 3, you can bring in assets, 4, you can assemble them, and 5, that you can manage them in a way to start building out world space, if that makes any sense. Question?
Can we submit this project as a video?
Yes, you can submit this project as a video. In fact, did I not stipulate that that should be the case? There it is. 1 video playthrough of you playing in your world with a valid character. Please upload these videos to YouTube because it makes it easier on Canvas to load links. The links are ready to be accepted. Question?
Well, now it's 2 questions.
Go
What's
ahead.
a valid character? Just one you can.
Something that you can pilot.
Okay. And then.
Some people have tried to get away with like putting the character and it's just kind of standing there and it doesn't move.
Okay.
I don't consider that valid.
Okay.
What's your next question?
For the link, can it be like an unlisted video?
Yes.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be a public video. You don't have to put yourself out there. Question?
Question for everybody. I still don't have my classes on Moodle. Is anybody else having that issue? I have all my
until
last
like
quarter.
yesterday.
Yeah. So I still have all my last quarter
Are you
classes.
doing the
Are you
JPCU that like to get to
Yeah,
the
make sure
website?
you're doing summer 24.
Summer 24.
Yeah,
If you take the old thing, like the spring one,
Okay.
you still have access to that. Just change out spring to summer. And that's how I did it for like the entirety of last quarter to
Yeah,
get my
I
Yeah,
did that
I had to do that all of last semester as well.
Okay, so I'm still putting in spring in the URL. Okay.
Okay, yeah, that's exactly why it's not working.
When does this due?
This is due next week. So don't kill yourself. It's not supposed to be amazing. It's supposed to just, again, test that you can add a playable character, that you know how Pi works, you can record and submit your assignments, that you know how to manage your files, that you know how to add elements to the environment, you know how to scale them properly, you know how to place them, and then you can place some preliminary lighting. We'll talk about lighting as a whole next week, and then I'll have an environment ready for you guys and gals to actually test that lighting, and I will teach you everything that I know about optimizing for games lighting and real-time lighting in general. Question?
Not that I'm planning to, but because the time says 11:59, do you want to preferably before class?
It's 11:59. That's midnight, right?
Yeah,
Well,
like have it like
Sunday?
like Monday at midnight. Like, do you want to?
Sunday at midnight.
I would prefer them because sometimes we go through them.
Okay.
But I also don't like being a jerk and putting people under the gun. The due date is as it is. So if you want to wait until that evening, usually people have a couple of other questions to ask related to the assignment, and then they'll feverishly try to do it. But that gives me the opportunity to cover any questions from the previous class to be able to address anybody's questions for that day, and then they can submit it that evening if that makes sense.
Okay.
So could you hypothetically submit something and then resubmit it next, like, later in the afternoon?
Yeah,
That day?
that's
Sit a little bit.
yeah. It gives a little bit more time to kind of work on some stuff, especially if there are changes or feedback that needs to happen. So,
You got one more.
I have 2 more. Go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify with the materials. Do you want us to use stuff from Quixel, or do you want us to like just use more like basic like theory sprays like I put an example photo? Or does it matter?
It doesn't really matter. If you want to go ahead and use and apply materials, by all means go ahead. I'm not going to stop you. I'm kind of leaving the door open for you to decide how much you want to apply. What this is kind of, since it's your first actual assignment, It proves to me a few things. It proves to me that you're not crashing your machines, for one. And it proves that at the very least you know the interface, you can navigate it, you can get you're comfortable with it, and then that gives me room to kind of be like, okay, I don't have to worry about that you don't know some of the interface, that it just kind of, the rest I can just teach without thinking about it.
Gotcha.
Question?
If we have, I have some experience in real, uh, if I have like an environment that's like already started, could I just finish that up for this assignment, or do you have to
Absolutely. And if you want me to take a look at it and give you some thoughts, I will absolutely also do the same thing.
Okay.
So if you have an assignment or something that you've already worked on, look, this is the kind of, this is the policy that I have about feedback. I will give student level feedback unless you really want me to tear it apart. If you want me to, Liz has seen this. If you really want me to tear it apart, I will absolutely tear it apart. It's not to be mean or anything, but a lot of students aren't necessarily used to kickback notes. Does anyone know what kickbacks are? Liz, tell them what a kickback is.
Well, it's basically just kind of like critique notes in a way. But it's like, here's all of the things you need to fix, and then you like kick it back. So it's like, go and fix these things, basically. It gives you a list of like what you should fix and work on, and then bring back the next week, and they'll go over it again. And then if there's more things that need to be fixed, those are additional things.
Imagine if I kicked back your homework 3 or 4 times. We don't do that here because that's not how it works.
We'd all get A's.
But in a perfect, in production, yeah, I'm gonna kick that back. Oh, it's Monday, I don't wanna review it. I'm gonna kick it back with a few notes, give me a new render. That's life. Essentially, if you want me to give it the highest possible level feedback, ask for it. But because students aren't necessarily ready to be dragged, I will give it student level feedback until otherwise warned, or until otherwise requested, right? And typically that's going to be like, yeah, this works, but you might want to consider this. It's missing this backdrop element. For our lighting assignment, there's going to be a pre-built environment that's going to be able to elucidate a lot of the general scale for what an environment actually is. Play space is actually about this big, and the rest is mostly backdrop. You'd be surprised how much of a game is actually physical backdrop to hide the environment, or to hide the fact that we're not in an infinitesimally large world. Does anyone here have pet fish? You decorate the bowl to kind of look like an environment, but really it's just a container. All games are in some way, shape, or form containers. The rest is really just decorating the containers so players can feel like they are doing something, but they're not. It's like that cow meme, the illusion of choice, where the only choice is to use the Unreal Engine. All right, do you have any other questions, folks? Yes, go ahead. If there's any other questions, send me an email. I'll go ahead and answer it as soon as I can. I'm gonna go ahead and see what's going on with your BSP thing right now. Final question?
For this assignment, we can do like an interior, or does it have to be an exterior?
It can be whatever you'd like. Interiors are harder. Exteriors are going to be a little bit simpler because you don't have to build the inside. The problem with building interiors is everyone thinks they know how interiors work.
It's elaborate.
Until you start building one. And then you realize that architects actually probably know what they're doing. Builders know. Architects definitely know what they're doing. If you want to challenge yourself, build an interior. There's a theory to making game interiors, though. We can talk about that when we get to level design in the future. So, all right, folks, take care of yourselves and each other. If you drive safe. I'll see everybody next week. Good luck. You go ahead and take a look at that BSP nonsense here.
Yeah, sorry about being late. I worked super late last night.
No
And
worries,
just caught
it
up in some
happens.
traffic.
I need to see what is going on with his BSP stuff. Let's do this actors panel. Yes.
Would it be alright for me to send you some work that I'm hoping to put on my portfolio and just have you absolutely tear it apart and
I'm
tell
not
me
gonna
what I should fix with it?
look. I'm not gonna grill it to be mean. I'm gonna say,
Yeah,
yeah, this works.
absolutely.
If you want me to take a look at it, yeah, just DM me on Discord if you already have me,
Okay.
and I'll be like, is it animation stuff?
No, it's environmental ones.
Okay.
From Environment 1.
I tend to focus a lot on making sure that. Well, Grant teaches Environment 1, and I taught him, so I know. I'll give it the.
Just to have more eyes on it, because I'll have Grant review it too, but just to have more.
You know what? He and I don't always agree on our feedback, but it works.
Yeah, it helps to have multiple different kind of viewpoints on it to kind of be able to fix things up. So that'd be appreciated. I just want to check with you on that.
I will definitely take care of that.
Fantastic, thank you.
What have I done? No, come back.
Just have a stupid question.
Go ahead.
With making worlds, I guess, would you say it's easier to start with bigger things and then work down to smaller details?
I usually start on paper, believe it or not.
Okay.
I start. My theory is always aim small, miss small, in the sense where it's like, if I'm gonna design something large, I build out a big gray box for what that area is supposed to be, and I play through it until it's perfect, or I play through it until I'm happy with it, which means that the TTP, was time to play, which is time to get from one side to the other. I measure that, and I'm like, okay, this feels fine. How quickly can I do it or run through it? Here's the intentional track. Have someone play it. Okay, this feels okay. This level design is good. It's time for asset integration. I usually don't get into actual making it look like a game until I know that at least at the box stage it runs properly, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I'll do a little bit more of that next week. We're talking about like kind of assembly. So when we're assembling an environment, it'll make a little bit more sense, kind of how you should start in terms of scale. There is no real like rule that says that you have to do it bigger or smaller. The idea is that it needs to accomplish the thing that you need it to do when you're building it. So if it's about getting from point A to point B, how long do you want that point A to point B to be?
Okay.
If it's about testing a mechanic like jumping, how long is someone going to be willing to tolerate the jumping until they get bored of it, so on and so forth, right? It should be big enough that as it needs to be.
Okay. Thank you.
I tried moving this while we were in class. I tried moving the project, the environment I would want to work on into from
Mhm.
Ms. 5 to 5.4, and broke a lot of the textures and stuff. At some point, I can send you probably a screenshot to help.
I know why it broke them.
Okay.
Did you drag and drop them in?
No.
Did you migrate?
So what I did was I opened up 4.5 and I tried to open the project, and something came up, so I just chose
So it's
to
on
open
Unreal.
the
It's on
copy.
Unreal 4 to Unreal 5.
Unreal 5 to Unreal 5.4.
Open the copy and it broke the textures. I would try. Excuse me.
It might be an issue with the textures because they're ones I made for texturing and lighting, so I'm not. So
They
that
shouldn't
could be
break.
it, yeah.
Because that desert is Unreal 5 0.
Gotcha.
So it shouldn't break at all. What something is being left behind? Are they just showing up gray? Or are the files there?
Should be, yeah, should be.
It should work.
Yeah, I'll double check, see if the file, they might have gotten zipped up when I went through and archived a bunch of old work. I forgot that Unreal pulls from your, like it can pull from the computer directly.
Right.
Yeah. Alright, thank you. Yeah.
Just a quick question.
Go ahead.
Have you talked to Holbert, or do you have anything for
The kind of same plan that happens, like I talked to him about it before. It's like they have planned to introduce PCs in the budget once the other building is built, but we're kind of like.
There's nothing for right now.
There's nothing for right now. The only
Okay.
solution is that we find you a laptop that could feasibly be afforded. Do you want? Have you gotten a chance to talk to her, Hulbert?
I haven't, partly because I couldn't find his office hours. I was looking around for that, and then also I've got pretty heavy load for classes this quarter, so I haven't been able to be on camp like.
Have a seat real quick. I'm gonna send an
Yeah.
email right now. It works on my machine. Come over here.
I'm not sure why it's not working on mine. That's something I should worry about or no?
I would. I wouldn't worry too much. We don't use BSPs for too much in general, but it should work. That's the thing that's confusing to me. Um,
Do
let
they
me
have to
see
be
here.
combined in some way or no?
They do not have to be combined. As you can see, I have a
They're two separate
cylinder.
objects, right?
Yep, two separate cylinder. I have my cylinder brush and my box brush. I'm wondering if your priorities are a little bit weird. Where is my
Nice, where
priority
would that
setting?
be?
Cannot remember where my priorities are. Usually I convert these to geometry as quickly as possible. You might want to, there it is,
Advanced.
set it to first or to last. It's probably set that to last. Go over and check that out real quick. Set your box to last. It should automatically default it to that, but I don't know why it's not. It's going to be under your geometry brush settings.
Yep. Okay.
That work?
Yeah.
Why your computer doesn't do that by default, I don't know.
Okay. All right.
That's what I was looking for. Usually there's a section called priority, but they must have changed it in 5.4.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I usually try to convert those to polygons as soon as possible so that I can use them for like
How is that done?
under the brush settings under order, you can hit create static mesh.
Oh, cool.
Unfortunately, I think I just created the wrong one. You have to select them both.
Yeah, I was
Yep,
gonna
you
say.
gotta select. You gotta select them.
Okay,
Select all the
select
brushes,
all the meshes
and
involved,
then
brushes involved.
once you create the static mesh, it's gonna be an ugly mesh, but it's not designed to be textured. It's designed to be a placeholder so that you can kind of put it together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, let me send helper.
Yeah. Like, and it's just like getting access to something for a period of time. I'm trying to find a laptop, but and I'm looking at specs and stuff with my dad,
Mhm.
trying to help, trying to find some stuff. But
I hate to
it's
say that a gaming laptop is gonna be what you want, but obnoxious. Not that you're obnoxious, but like the fact that we. Can I be mad about us not
Yes,
having
please.
not getting stuff for you guys? Not that it's outside of my power to like.
I know, and I'm not like I understand it's kind of just
I'm
at the
just mad
school
about it.
administration level, but it's just if I had been told last quarter, I probably could have figured something out, right?
Mhm.
It's just difficult in a short term notice of, oh yeah, by the way, you have an assignment in like 2 weeks that is going to be due using equipment that you don't have access to. That's all.
And it's not like you can go to the library and like solve this.
No, and I'd be willing, like, if it comes down to it and like there's only like I will be willing to work work around a lot of stuff to just try to find something. And I wish they'd let us use that computer. Like if there's no class going on in here.
I don't have a problem with it. In fact, I'll probably set you up to do it.
Cause I will be willing to come in early and late and figure out when there's classes and when there's none and just work.
This machine ain't the best, but I'll set you up.
Better than nothing.
I'll do that right now.
And I've already watched you twice have to edit it to work.
But this machine,
Yeah.
it works fine. Hey Matt. Excuse me. Hardware. I'll also CC you.
I appreciate that.
Audrey
Yeah.
Shaughnessy. Hardware limited.
No.
I'm going to go ahead and set her up on the teaching station with security in place, but she doesn't really have access to hardware. Her. You're saying student housing, right?
Yeah. I don't have access to student housing or the school. Also you can't, even if I got like a, I don't know if a PC would be better, having that in my apartment, 90% of the time the internet's out.
At the,
Yeah, the
wow.
student housing, 90% of the time we don't have internet. I go through so much data, cause I have to hotspot my computer or come down here to work. So I briefly looked into like PCs, but then realized that was would be a useless thing 90% of the time. I appreciate you helping me out with this though.
Absolutely. Do we have access student fund or anything? Okay, HIMAX got a student who's currently very hardware limited. I'm gonna go ahead and set her up on the teaching station security place, but she doesn't really have access to hardware in student housing. Is there anything we can do for her? I know we used to have a PC that used to be in the library that died, but she's very limited financially on what can work, and I don't want her to spend a ton of money on a laptop, but she definitely needs some support for the time being. Do we have access to a student fund or anything? Let me go ahead and save all this real quick and see.
I'll also look into seeing if there's any cause there's sometimes, I don't know if this is considered a STEM field, right?
It technically is.
So I can look into like women in STEM stuff, cause they usually like giving money to people, so I can
It's
also
worth looking at, yeah.
I'll
That's
look into
100%
that
worth looking at.
and see if I can't
Oh, I didn't stop recording. Whoops. Have a good one, folks. If you're still here, the password